The kidneys are an important organ in the body because they perform a number of functions, such as secreting products to regulate water levels in the body, like the hormone EPO and the enzyme renin. They're a site where the body carries out gluconeogenesis, that is, the conversion of non-carbohydrates into a usable energy source for the body. They're the location where we convert vitamin D into its active form. They also help regulate extracellular homeostasis by controlling levels of acids, bases, pH, ions like sodium and potassium, and metabolic waste like urea in the body. This process of regulating these extracellular components of body fluids is called our excretion kind of process. Excretion is getting rid of those products that are potentially harmful to the body, like breathing out carbon dioxide, urinating out urea. And excretion is made or is possible by 3 different steps. The first one is filtration, that is, separating the fluid portion of our blood away from the cellular portion of our blood. Following that is the process of reabsorption. Much of that fluid that got filtered out during filtration contains things that we want to retain, like water, glucose, sodium, potassium. Most of those chemicals are things that the body needs and tries to reabsorb back into the bloodstream. The third step of excretion is secretion. This is selectively pumping certain materials from the blood into the urine. Like if we have too high of sodium or too high of potassium levels in the blood, we can selectively pump those ions from the bloodstream into the urine to get rid of them. Notice that filtration by itself is not the only job the kidneys do. Filtration is actually one step in a much bigger process of helping control extracellular homeostasis. Within the kidneys, the nephrons are the structural and functional units. These nephrons are the anatomical sites where excretion takes place. That nephron is going to be filtering, reabsorbing, and secreting materials from the blood as well as back into the blood. That means that our kidneys have to have a pretty complex blood flow. There are a lot of steps to what you see on the screen right now, but what we really want to focus on is that an afferent arteriole carries blood into a special kind of capillary called a glomerulus. On the other side of most capillaries, we would find a venule, but here we find an efferent arteriole that drains blood away. The reason for that is after this efferent arteriole is a second set of capillaries called peritubular capillaries, or in some nephrons, the vasa recta. What we see here is an unusual kind of system for our cardiovascular system, where we go from one capillary bed into another. Most of the time, capillary beds sit pretty much by themselves, so we need an arteriole that feeds blood into both of these capillary beds. If we take a look at the larger nephron that's being fed this blood supply, we can see that the afferent arteriole is taking that blood into a capillary bed called a glomerulus, and that the efferent arteriole is draining blood away from that capillary bed. Within the glomerulus is where the filtration step happens, where we're separating most of the fluid away from the blood cells of the blood. All of that material we're filtering out of the blood needs to get collected, and it gets collected by the glomerular capsule, which also goes by the name of the Bowman's capsule. All of that material that's collected in the Bowman's capsule then drains into a twisting structure called the proximal convoluted tubule, which leads down into the nephron loop, which also goes by the name of the loop of Henle, which eventually ascends and starts to twist again as part of the distal convoluted tubule. That distal convoluted tubule empties its material into the collecting duct, which collects this fluid from multiple nephrons all together. These sites, the Bowman's capsule, proximal convoluted tubule, the loop of Henle, distal convoluted tubule, and the collecting duct, are the locations where reabsorption and secretion can take place. Along those tubes, we need to be able to get material reabsorbed back into our bloodstream, or selectively secrete material out of our bloodstream into the urine. In order to do that, we need to take a slightly more complex view here of our nephron. We can still see our afferent arteriole leading into a glomerulus, and that glomerulus is the spot where filtration happens, and the blood cells drain away through the efferent arteriole. That efferent arteriole then branches to form the peritubular capillaries that are wrapping around all of those tubes we were naming a moment ago, like the proximal convoluted tubule, the loop of Henle, and the distal convoluted tubule. This is the reason why reabsorption and secretion can take place along the length of those other tubes, because they are wrapped with this capillary bed that allows for exchange of material between the blood and the fluid in the kidney tubules. One more structure that we really need to take a look at is called the juxtaglomerular complex. The juxtaglomerular complex, by its name, means something has to be juxtaposed to the glomerulus. A fancy way of saying something has to be close to the glomerulus. In this case, what is close to the glomerulus is the ascending arm of the loop of Henle, that portion of the nephron tubes that is going to eventually lead into the distal convoluted tubule. What's important about this juxtaglomerular complex is that it allows for communication between the afferent arteriole and the kidney tubules so that we can fine-tune what's actually traveling through any of those tubes. Here, we can see the afferent arteriole is running very close to the ascending arm of the loop of Henle. On the surface of that loop of Henle, there's a series of cells called the macula densa cells. These macula densa cells serve an important control and regulation process for the fluid that's traveling through these tubes, because the macula densa cells are chemoreceptors that monitor the concentration of sodium chloride that's about to move into the distal convoluted tubule. If that concentration gets too high or too low, we need a way to regulate it to make sure we are putting the correct amount of sodium into our urine or back into our blood. On the afferent arteriole, there is a set of cells called the granular cells. The granular cells are mechanoreceptors that are constantly monitoring blood pressure, and if there is a change in blood pressure, they can release that enzyme called renin that can control blood pressure and flow into the glomeruli. Between the macula densa and the granular cells is a set of cells called the extraglomerular mesangial cells. That just means that they are messenger cells that allows for messages to be passed between the macula densa and the granular cells, so that the portions of this juxtaglomerular complex can work together to properly regulate fluid movement and fluid flow through these tubes.